So this is an older top-of-the-line Hohner B-flat, E-flat accordion. I think model 235, I believe. It's a 4-voice LMMM. This had extensive restoration. It was had a lot of problems inside. Mechanically, there were a bunch of, I think there was 11 buttons that were already fallen off or were loose, so I've reattached them. There were some little wooden glue blocks that are used to hold the keyboard cover on, etc. in the back. I had to re-glue them in position. I think I have a picture of that. While I was in there with the back off, I did put a foam backing thing. So now the button travel has been limited so that they stop flush with the keyboard, which is advantageous. There were a number of areas with leaks. The biggest offender, I think, was there's a wooden block, I got a picture of it, that's a pass-through for the switches. This has switches on the back of the accordion, of the keyboard. 3 switches, one's controlling the low reads, one's controlling the 0 middle read, and this one controls the high and low middle reads. So, so there is a wooden block, an area where all those switch levers pass through the instrument, and it had cracked and had a fairly large gap there. So I had to clamp it up, re-glue it. That one I think I used epoxy glue. I needed a lot of strength because there was some stress in there. To clamp it, it was requiring stress. So the epoxy is holding that very well. Someone else had done a bad attempt at a repair with wax and stuff, and so it made it more difficult to glue. But I've got that done. There are still a little bit of air going through there, which is inaccessible. So I don't think there's going to be a way to fix that without completely disabling all 3 of those switches. What else? Another block, the keyboard attachment block, which is right behind the 2 large screws that hold the keyboard on, one of them had split. So that was sort of a tricky 3-dimensional clamping situation for that. This, of course, has slides on all the treble reed blocks and actually some of the bass. And some of those were very stiff, some were not even working at all. So I took all the slides out, I polished them, both the flat surface and those edges, which then allowed them to slip nicely. It's a very tight fit in a thin cavity on the bottoms of those reed blocks. But I got all of those working nicely. I think I have a picture of one of the slides when it was out. So it's a big improvement. In fact, I think I could demonstrate it here. You can see here's the 3 switches there. And there's one on the back. I won't demonstrate that now, but for the bass side. And that also is working nicely. I might even have a video on that. What else? A number of the reed blocks were sort of twisted, meaning that they wouldn't sit flat, even though they're only clamped on each end. That's normal in an accordion, but so you need that bottom of to be completely flat. There's one, the worst one was about a 1 millimeter. If you tilt it to one side, you could slip a 1 millimeter metal shim under. So just showing how badly twisted this thing is. Full millimeter raised corner, so That was sanded flat. All of them, most of them needed a little sanding. Some of them needed a bunch. Got them all flat, and then of course have to re-shim so that they sit tight. After that, what else? On the treble side, there were, particularly the inside row of pallets, some of them were not sitting flat. So, and this is a 4-voice, so it's a pretty long pallet on that. And I've got a little video showing how that you open it and close it, and it's not really shutting completely, which is causing a leak at all times with no buttons pushed. You can watch that video.
So if you look at the sticker, where the sticker is, sort of looks like it's shut, but I'm going to push it now. You can see it's not really closed, and after I close it and let go, it opens again. So the pallet is not sitting flat. There it is. So that needs that flexible pivot to fix it.
So what I did is I've got a new method I'm using where I take the pallet off of the metal lever, and I embed a little tiny little metal ball bearing down in that groove. So then when that metal lever is down in that groove, instead of being a sort of a tight connection, it's actually sort of pivoting on that ball. I use hot glue to hold it in place, but it gives it flexibility not only this way, but also this way. And I've got a little video I'll show now of the before and after.
So on the left is a typical pre-modification sort of rigid setup where there really isn't much flexibility that way or that way. Whereas this one, now with the ball bearing, little tiny ball pivot and flexible hot glue, there's a lot more flexibility that way and then also this way. Whereas here you can see it's a little tiny bit, but here you got more flexibility, which allows this pallet to then sit flat on the board, on the soundboard.
Okay, so I did that for all of the whole inner row. The outer row actually was clamping nicely. I didn't find leaks there, so there were a few pallets I needed to. The padding was just shot or too thin, and so I replaced that. But most of them I didn't need that. Okay, over on the bass side, there were it's got a pretty complicated, it's a 5-voice bass setup. So when you hit a bass note and have the stop engaged, you're getting 5 octaves, so 5 separate reeds all on that one note. Very rich sound, it's very lovely, but it's a fairly complex mechanism. There's a fixed, glued in place block for the large, medium size, and small. Next side is a medium on the, and that's a sort of a fixed structure in there. And I've got a little video, so you can see where there wasn't really much wood broken, but there was a lot of the glue joints had separated. So I'll show that video now. So to clamp that was pretty complicated. It was 3-dimensional. I had to do a lot of gluing a lot of joints all at the same time. You couldn't, stagger them. So it ended up being a combination of C-clamps and weights to close up all those. And some of the long ones where I didn't think even with a weight it was going to completely fill that gap. I used a polyurethane glue that that sort of foams and expands a little. So that's a good glue for there where you're trying to fill gaps. It didn't really need structural strength much there, but it needed to, the air needed to be blocked. So anyway, so that's all fixed, and the slider, the brass sliders on that end are working nicely. What else? I did find a couple broken reeds, or one was completely broken. I got a picture of that, I think, and there was another one that someone else that was in there really just sort of destroyed when they filed it too thin at the tip, and it wasn't salvageable, so I replaced that. Okay, on to tuning. This has 316 reeds in it, and the whole instrument was out of the factory was at A435 hertz, which was somewhat of a standard that Hohner used. They were using both A440 and A435 back then. This one was A435, so the customer wanted me to raise the whole instrument up to 440. So that's a lot of reeds, but I did it. So the way, I generally get it close outside of the instrument where it's a little easier to work on, or I target some reeds, get them right to zero in the box, then bring it out, use those as my references, tune all of them to that. And then the chord reeds, since it's a complicated, there's not a one-to-one relationship between a button and a pallet. This one, because they're shared, this button will open 1, 5, and 8, and this button will open 2, 7, and 9. I found that the best way to do it was to tune one set of reeds in the box, then take it out, and then I made a fixture on my laser cutter so that using those as reference, I could then, on the bench where it's faster and you have access to the inside and outside of the reeds, I then got this all tuned to itself after tuning the one row to the correct reference, and then put it back in the box. I did the final tuning in here, but that gets it way, much closer. It was just small tweaking once it was back in the instrument. Okay, what else? I'm going to do a different setup to demonstrate the instrument, but where the switches, I've not really seen one like that, where one switch is for the middle zero read. So there's 3 middle reads, minus, 0, and plus. Then there's a low read. And this middle read is controlled, I think it was here, middle 0 read, and then the low read was controlled by another lever, whereas this one controls the minus and plus reads. So later I'll show that and then go through the notes. It came to me very, very wet tuned, and the customer wanted that retained, so I shifted that wetness all the way up. So it's still quite wet with all 3 reeds in. And so I will demonstrate that now. Another shout out to John Peluso, who provides a nice P84 mic, which I'll use when I'm demonstrating the instrument. Okay, so let's take a listen here. Where's that 7th? There it is. And over here. So these are 7ths, these 2 additional buttons, and that was in the 5-voice mode. Now I've cut out several the super high, the high reeds, and then the lowest reed. So it doesn't consume as much air. It's not quite as rich a sound. Okay, on the treble side, okay, we seem to be in the low octave setting. As the club configuration. So these are modified from the standard Hohner. Okay, so bring in the other, oops. So now it's a Bendonian or low octave, and then the middle reeds. Okay, and now I'll take out the low reed. And very wet. There it is, Hohner 235, 4 voice and B flat and E flat.